Under the high vaulted ceiling of the Galactic Academy training hall, cadets from 100 different worlds clashed and sparred with weapons that glowed with energy fields or pulsed with plasma currents. It was a place where the finest technology of the galaxy was on display, and every young warrior carried themselves with pride in the superiority of their people and their tools. Among them walked a new figure, a human cadet whose simple uniform looked plain beside the decorated armor of his peers. What drew the most attention, however, was the weapon strapped to his side. For instead of a plasma rifle or a shimmering saber, he carried a single steel blade forged by hand with no energy cells, no glowing circuitry, and no humming vibration. It looked like something pulled out of an ancient museum display, and that was exactly why the laughter began the moment he stepped onto the training floor. A tall, scaled alien from the planet Drashin was the first to mock him, his voice booming, so loudly that it echoed against the walls. He asked the human if he had gotten lost on the way to a farming village and wondered aloud if the blade was meant for cutting crops instead of armor. The laughter spread quickly through the ranks. Even the insectoid cadets clicked their mandibles in amusement, and the feathered avians let out shrill whistles of ridicule. The human did not rise to the bait. He simply adjusted his grip on the hilt of the blade and kept walking across the floor as, though their laughter meant nothing, one of the academy instructors raised a brow but did not interfere. He had seen this before. Alien cadets often mocked humans when they first arrived, but usually the humans earned their place with sharp minds and quick reflexes. Still, the weapon was unusual even for a human, and he made a note to watch closely today. The mocking grew louder as the human was assigned to sparring drills. He was paired against an armored cadet from the wealthy noble houses of the Zelkran Empire, a species that prided itself on high technology. Their cadet strutted into the ring, carrying a plasma saber that glowed with a deadly blue arc. The energy pulsed with every step, and the audience leaned forward, eager to see the human embarrassed. The Zelkran sneered down at him, towering nearly 2 heads taller, and demanded to know if the human wanted to borrow a proper weapon before they began. The human shook his head once slowly and drew the blade from its sheath. The steel gleamed dully under the lights, and the hall grew oddly quiet for a moment, as the sound of metal against leather echoed in the air. The sight of such a crude thing being wielded with calm certainty unsettled more than a few observers, though they would not admit it. The sparring began with the ring's signal, and the Zelkran lunged forward, plasma saber swinging in a wide arc meant to overwhelm at once. The human stepped aside his feet, moving in a fluid pattern that showed long practice. His blade rose not to block but to redirect the energy strike. Sparks leapt into the air, but instead of shattering, the steel held strong. The Zelkran's eyes widened in surprise as his own weapon met resistance. He had not expected then. The human twisted his wrist, and the steel blade slid down in a clean line, testing the outer layer of the noble's armor. The result was immediate. The shining armor split with a shriek of tearing composite material, leaving a long scar through the plating. The entire hall fell silent. Gasps rippled outward. Even the instructor leaned forward in disbelief. The Zelkran staggered back, staring down at his armor as if unable to process what had just happened. His weapon hummed uncertainly as, though its power had been disrupted, while the human stepped back into stance, eyes steady, hand firm on the hilt and body poised for another strike. There was no arrogance in his movements, no gloating, only the quiet confidence of someone who knew what his weapon could do. The laughter that had filled the hall minutes before was gone, replaced by a heavy tension. Cadets shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some whispering to each other about impossible metallurgy, others wondering if it had been a trick, but deep down they all knew what they had seen. The primitive blade had not only withstood the attack it had carved through the finest armor money could buy. The Zelkran lifted his plasma saber again, his face twisting with anger. But, for the first time, his eyes showed something else, something the human had been waiting to see: respect laced with fear. The sparring match was far from over, but one truth had already spread through every watching cadet. The human was not to be mocked so easily. The moment the cut appeared on the gleaming armor, the crowd erupted into a storm of voices. Some shouted disbelief, others cried foul play, and a few remained in stunned silence, unable to accept what they had just witnessed. The Zelkran, noble cadet, burned with humiliation. His species prided themselves on perfection and dominance, and he could not stand the thought of being humbled by what he saw as a lesser race. His grip on the plasma saber tightened, and the humming blade crackled. With renewed power, he lunged again this time, not with arrogance but with fury, determined to crush the human before more damage could be done to his pride. The human cadet did not flinch. He moved with the calm rhythm of someone who had been trained since childhood to fight with a blade that demanded respect rather than relying on energy cells or advanced programming. His body bent with fluid grace, slipping past the wide strike. His steel weapon flickered once more in the bright arena lights, and when it met, the noble's saber spark showered the floor. The clash rang out like thunder across the hall, and many cadets leaned forward as if drawn in by an invisible force. The noble struck again and again, raining down heavy blows with strength and desperation. But the human flowed around each strike, using subtle shifts of his stance and sharp, precise counters. The steel blade left shallow cuts across the noble's armor, every slice drawing gasps from the watching crowd. The noble could not believe it, for every time his saber landed against the primitive weapon, the steel refused to break it, did not warp it, did not crack. Instead, it seemed to drink in the energy, as if it was meant to resist such advanced weapons. An insectoid cadet whispered to his neighbor that perhaps the humans had discovered a forbidden alloy, a secret material that should not exist. Others speculated in hushed voices about ancient war records that hinted at human resilience, but most still clung to disbelief, because it was easier to think of a trick than to face the truth the human cadet was proving. Before their eyes, the noble's strikes grew less coordinated as his anger overtook his discipline, and the human's steady expression only fueled his rage further. With a sudden pivot, the human slipped under a clumsy swing, and the steel blade arced upward in a swift stroke, carving through another panel of armor. The noble stumbled back, his chest plate sparking where it had been pierced. Gasps turned to shouts, and the instructor finally barked for silence, but he did not stop the fight. He wanted to see where it would lead. The noble bellowed in frustration and threw himself forward, swinging wildly, but the human moved as if anticipating. Every strike his feet were sure, his shoulders rolled with each motion, and his blade carried the weight of traditions older than the academy itself. Every clash echoed the legacy of survival on a death world where only the strongest and most adaptable endured. Finally, the human pressed forward with a flurry of swift cuts, his steel weapon slicing the noble's saber arm just enough to send the plasma blade spinning from his grip. It clattered across the floor, and the hall went silent again. The noble froze, staring at his empty hand, then at the human whose blade rested lightly against the weakened armor at his side. The fight was finished. Everyone could see it. The instructor raised a hand, declaring the match over, but the tension in the air did not vanish. The noble stood trembling with fury and shame while the human stepped back, lowering his blade without expression. He had not shouted. He had not gloated. He had not even spoken once during the battle yet. He had commanded every eye in the hall. Whispers grew louder now. Cadets leaned into one another, discussing how a weapon so crude had achieved the impossible. Some suggested hidden technology. Others insisted it had to be magic, while a small number began to suspect the truth that it was not the blade alone but the one who wielded it. The noble stormed from the arena, pushing through the crowd, unwilling to endure their stares. But the human simply sheathed his blade and walked to the edge of the ring, his movements unhurried and his gaze steady. He had not fought for pride or recognition. He had fought because he had been challenged, and he had shown what humans could do in the face of arrogance. The instructor's eyes followed him closely, his mind already racing with questions. He knew that the academy would not forget this day, and that this display would spread quickly beyond its walls. The alien cadets would tell the story to their families and their commanders, and soon the entire academy would be buzzing with one undeniable truth. The human cadet and his so-called primitive blade had shaken the foundations of their certainty, and the lesson was only beginning. The story of the human cadet spread through the academy faster than fire across dry grass, and by the time the next training day began, every corner of the mess hall and every shadowed corridor buzzed with the same whispers about the primitive blade that had sliced through noble Zelkran armor, and about the calm young human who had wielded it without flinching or boasting. What had once been laughter now became suspicion and nervous speculation. Some cadets, avoided him as though the weapon carried a curse, while others followed him with their eyes studying the way he moved, as though every gesture might reveal the secret of his strength. When the morning drills were announced, the crowd gathered early, in the training hall, hoping to see more of the human and his strange weapon. The instructors arranged another round of sparring, this time against a different opponent, one chosen not for arrogance but for skill, a veteran cadet of the Varkari who were known for their disciplined combat style and layered exo-armor. The Varkari cadet entered the ring in silence, his tall frame wrapped in segmented plating that shifted smoothly with his movements. Unlike the boastful Zelkron, this warrior's reputation was built on precision and patience. He carried a double-bladed staff charged with twin energy edges, and his eyes glowed faintly with focus. The human stepped forward, blade at his side, his face unreadable. The crowd hushed as the signal to begin rang out. The Varkari circled first, his movement slow, deliberate, testing the human's reactions. The human did not chase him. He stood poised, feet grounded, body balanced, the steel blade held lightly in one hand like an extension of his own spirit. The first clash came sudden. The Varkari lunged with a sweeping strike that hummed with energy. The human turned his body just enough, the blade flashed upward with perfect timing, and sparks leapt into the air, the sound of steel against energy cracked like a storm. The Varkari withdrew and came again, faster, sharper, but the human's rhythm never broke. Every movement told a story born of Earth's harsh soil and the battles of survival that had shaped humanity long before plasma and exosuits had been imagined. His blade was not just metal. It was history distilled into a weapon forged by hands that understood war on an intimate level. Each time he struck, the Varkari staggered a fraction. Each time his armor showed new scars. Though the cuts were shallow, they proved the same truth as before. No alloy, no shimmering shield seemed safe against this so-called primitive steel. The cadets around the arena leaned forward, breathless, some with fear, others with awe, as the duel unfolded. Unlike the Zelkron, who had lost himself to fury, the Varkari fought with discipline. He adjusted angles, sought weaknesses, tried to push the human into overextending, but the human refused to fall into the trap. His footwork was quiet, precise, almost too calm, as if he knew exactly how much energy to give each strike, as if he had measured the battle before it even began. The clash grew more intense. The staff whirled in glowing arcs. The steel sword met it with ringing clarity. The air itself seemed to vibrate with tension. At last the Varkari pressed with a sudden burst, his staff spinning in a blur, striking high-low, then twisting toward the human's side. It was a maneuver that had ended many matches before, but the human pivoted his body and let the momentum carry the staff too far. Then with one smooth cut he sliced through the outer segment of the exo-armor. Sparks and fragments scattered across the ring. The Varkari froze, staring down at the clean line carved into his plating. The human stood ready for more, but the instructor called the match with a sharp command. The hall erupted with gasps and cries once more. The Varkari bowed low, a gesture of respect rarely given to an opponent, and the human inclined his head. In return, no words were spoken, yet the meaning was clear. Even the proud warriors of other worlds recognized what had been shown here. The whispers that filled the hall no longer carried only fear. They carried reverence. Cadets began to murmur about human strength, about the mysterious blade, about what else might be hidden in the history of a species so often dismissed as young and fragile. The instructor looked over the gathered crowd and saw the shift in their faces. The lesson was beginning to take root. The human cadet had not come to boast or to entertain, yet in silence he had challenged the very foundation of their beliefs. The academy had thought of humans as backward stragglers clinging to outdated traditions, but with every strike of that blade they were being forced to see the truth. Simplicity was not weakness, humility was not fragility, and what they had laughed at yesterday might tomorrow be the very thing they feared. The human left the ring quietly. His blade returned to its sheath, and his expression unchanged, but his presence lingered like a storm cloud over the hall. And every cadet knew the academy would never be the same again. The academy could not contain the whispers any longer, and by the time the sun rose on the fourth day, the human cadet had become the subject of every conversation. Instructors who once ignored the presence of the Earthborn now watched with sharp eyes, trying to understand how a simple weapon could cut through the most advanced alloys in the galaxy. Rumors swirled that his blade was made from materials forbidden by treaties. Others insisted the humans had uncovered ancient technology from lost civilizations, and still more claimed it was not the blade, but the hands that held it that turned it into something terrifying. On that morning, the commandant of the academy ordered a formal demonstration. The human would face not just another cadet, but an instructor seasoned in combat and outfitted with reinforced armor. Designed to withstand heavy weaponry, the purpose was not only to test the human, but also to calm the storm of gossip. The arena filled with cadets standing shoulder to shoulder, craning their necks to see the one who had already broken the pride of the Zelkron and humbled the precision of the Varkari. This time no one laughed. The air was heavy with expectation and unease. The instructor chosen was a veteran of the Trasengard. His species were known for their heavy musculature and layered exosuits that allowed them to fight in extreme conditions. He stepped into the arena carrying a massive energy hammer, a weapon that pulsed with raw force with a single strike. It could shatter barriers and leave opponents broken. He raised the hammer high and let the glow of its core cast long shadows across the floor. The human entered quietly as before, blade at his side, eyes steady. No words exchanged between the two, only silence broken by the hum of the hammer. When the signal rang, the instructor charged forward, the ground shaking with each step. His hammer swung in a devastating arc meant to end the fight. Instantly, the human moved with a grace that seemed impossible against such brute force. He slipped to the side, his blade flashing upward. To meet the hammer, sparks erupted. The sound was deafening, but once again the steel held steady. The audience gasped as the human pressed closer, his blade sliding against the exosuit and leaving a fresh cut along the reinforced plating. The instructor growled deep in his chest, more surprised than hurt, and turned his weapon in a powerful backhand swing that would have crushed lesser opponents. The human ducked low, his feet moving with quiet rhythm. His blade snapped out in a quick, precise thrust, striking the joint of the armor where plates overlapped. A sharp screech rang through the hall as metal gave way, and the instructor staggered back. The human did not pursue recklessly. He waited calm and focused, his breathing steady, as though every move had been written long before the match began. The instructor adjusted his stance, tightening his grip and coming again, this time slower, testing the human's defense. Each strike of the hammer was a calculated test, but each time the steel blade parried or slid past, leaving shallow but undeniable scars across the supposedly unbreakable armor. The cadets watching could hardly believe their eyes. This was no arrogant noble. This was no fellow student. This was a seasoned fighter whose skill had been proven in battle, and yet he too was faltering against the human cadet. The whispers grew restless. What did it mean if a single human could stand against such power, and not only endure, but press forward with quiet certainty? The final exchange came when the instructor raised his hammer high for a crushing downward strike. The human stepped in closer than anyone expected, and with one smooth rising cut, he sliced the power conduit along the haft. The glow of the weapon flickered and died, leaving only a lifeless shell. The steel blade stopped just short of the instructor's throat, hanging in the air like a sentence left unfinished. The silence was absolute. Every cadet and every instructor knew the outcome. The veteran lowered his head and raised a hand in acknowledgement of defeat. The commandant rose from his seat, his expression grave, for he understood more than the cadets what this meant. The galaxy had relied on technology for centuries, building weapons that glowed brighter and struck harder. But here was a human with nothing more than forged steel and discipline, standing victorious again and again. The message was unmistakable. Sometimes simplicity cut deeper than progress. The human bowed slightly and sheathed his blade, his face still calm, but the tension in the air was unbearable. The cadets looked on with wide eyes, some filled with admiration, others with fear, and all of them with a dawning realization the galaxy had underestimated humanity for too long, and now they were seeing why that was a mistake. When the human left the arena, the hall did not erupt into noise this time. Instead, it stayed silent. A silence heavy with respect and a silence heavy with fear. For the cadets now knew they were no longer looking at a curiosity. They were looking at a reminder that humanity carried within it something that technology could not erase, a truth that every alien in the academy would carry with them long after this day. The academy halls felt different. After the duel with the instructor, the laughter that had once followed the human cadet wherever he walked had vanished, replaced by a wary respect. Cadets, who once mocked him, now stepped aside when he passed, and even the proudest among them found their gazes lowering whenever the steel blade glinted at his side. Whispers filled the air, not just about the weapon, but about the human himself, some claimed. He had been trained from birth in secret traditions of his people. Others swore he carried the blood of ancient warriors whose names had long been forgotten. The commandant ordered the blade to be studied, hoping to uncover its secrets and prove to the cadets that what they had witnessed was nothing more than exotic technology. The weapon was taken to the Academy's analysis chamber, where advanced scanners dissected every atom of its composition. Yet the results baffled the instructors. It was steel, pure and simple. No hidden energy core, no alien alloy, no trick that could explain its ability to carve through the most advanced armor. The instructors debated in circles until one of the senior masters suggested the truth lay not in the blade itself, but in the one who wielded it. When the cadets gathered again in the mess hall, the human was seated alone as always, but this time he was not ignored. Groups of aliens watched him from across the room, speaking in hushed tones. One brave cadet approached and asked how such a weapon could stand against plasma and shields. The human lifted his eyes slowly and answered in a voice calm and steady. "It is not the blade that wins battles. It is the hand that guides it." The words struck many deeply because they carried a weight beyond arrogance. It was not boastful. It was not mocking. It was simply truth, spoken by someone who had lived it. Later that evening, an assembly was called, and the commandant addressed the cadets, his voice stern but thoughtful. He reminded them of the purpose of the academy, to bring together warriors of every species so that arrogance could be stripped away and strength tested in unity. He gestured toward the human and told the gathered crowd that what they had seen was not a trick and not an accident, but a lesson. Arrogance blinds warriors to the value of simplicity. Technology may change, but skill and will endure. The cadets listened in silence, some nodding with reluctant agreement, others shifting uneasily as if the foundation of their beliefs had been shaken. The alien noble Zelkran, who had first mocked the human, sat in the back, his pride still wounded. Yet even he could not deny the truth. He had felt the steel cut through his armor. He had seen his energy blade falter against it. What burned most was not the defeat, but the realization that the human had never mocked him back, had never sought to humiliate, only to fight with calm purpose. In that silence, the noble had learned more about strength than in all his years of training. The following days saw changes in the academy. Training cadets began to approach the human not to jeer, but to ask questions. Some wanted to understand his footwork, others his breathing, and others simply his philosophy. Though he spoke sparingly, each word was considered and carried meaning. He told them that on Earth, survival was not guaranteed. Every day was a battle against a hostile environment, and every human carried in their blood the legacy of countless generations who had fought tooth and claw to endure when technology failed, when weapons broke. It was the will of the human spirit that carried them through. One evening, the Varkari cadet who had fought him with the double-bladed staff sought him out in private. The alien bowed respectfully and asked for guidance in learning the way of the blade. The human studied him in silence before nodding once and agreeing. From that day, the two began to train together. In the dim hours before sunrise, and word spread quickly that the Varkari moved differently. Now calmer, steadier, more precise, the ripple effect of the human's presence was already reshaping the academy in ways no one had anticipated. The instructors themselves debated late into the night what this meant for the galaxy. If one human cadet with a simple blade could shake the confidence of so many species, what would it mean if an army of such warriors were unleashed? Some argued it was nothing more than an anomaly. Others felt it was a warning, a reminder that humanity should never be dismissed as primitive or weak, but as a people who carried within them a resilience that could not be measured by scanners or simulations. As the days passed and the tension thickened, One truth became clear to every cadet and instructor alike. The human was no longer simply a student to be tested. He had become a symbol, a mirror, that reflected their arrogance and shattered it with every strike of his blade, whether they loved him or feared him. Every being in the academy knew that they would leave this place changed forever because of the human who carried a weapon that was supposed to be obsolete, but instead proved that the simplest edge could cut through not only armor but also pride. By the time Part 6 of the story unfolded, the human cadet was no longer a mystery whispered about in corners. He had become a presence that reshaped the atmosphere of the entire academy. Cadets who once scoffed at simplicity now found themselves questioning the very foundations of their training. Every weapon drill, every combat simulation felt different because in the back of their minds they remembered the gleam of a steel blade carving through armor like parchment. Even those who hated him could not ignore the lesson his victories had written into their memories. The commandant convened a council of senior instructors behind closed doors. The debate grew fierce. Some insisted that the human should be dismissed for disrupting order. Others believed he should be elevated as a prime example of discipline and skill. The commandant listened carefully and reminded them that the academy was built to test all species and all philosophies of war. If one human cadet could rattle their confidence, then it was not the human who had failed but the academy. For underestimating him still, the council remained divided, and the decision was made to test him further in a way that could not be denied. When the announcement came, the mess hall fell into silence. The human cadet would be entered into a full-scale war simulation, one reserved for the most advanced of students. It was not a simple duel but a scenario where multiple cadets would be pitted against one another in squads with objectives and hazards spread across a vast training arena. Energy weapons, drones, and live combat tactics would be allowed. The goal was not simply to fight, but to command, adapt, and survive. It was the kind of trial that forged leaders or broke them completely. As the cadets prepared, whispers returned, though this time not mocking, but tense speculation. Many believed the human would fail. Without advanced technology, his blade might serve him in a duel. But how could it help when squads of aliens fired plasma from a distance or when drones swept the sky above? Others argued that his calm and focus might allow him to turn simplicity into an advantage. None were certain, but all were eager to see the outcome. When the simulation began, the arena lit with the chaos of battle. Squads clashed across ruined city streets, holographic towers loomed over shattered ground, and automated drones scanned the skies. The human was assigned to a squad of mixed species, each one doubtful of his role. They questioned why he carried no rifle, no shield generator. But when the first ambush came, it was his quick thinking that saved them. He moved ahead silently, sensing danger where others saw none. And when enemy cadets burst from cover, his blade flashed in brutal precision, striking before their weapons could fire. His squad followed him reluctantly at first, but as the simulation wore on, they realized he had a sense for combat that transcended equipment. He anticipated ambushes, he used terrain to his advantage. He moved with patience until the perfect moment, and when he struck, it was decisive. The cadets who once doubted him began to trust his judgment. Even the Varkari who had trained with him spoke in quiet tones to the others, urging them to follow his lead. Enemy squads grew desperate when they realized the human's group was advancing faster than expected. They unleashed drones to rain fire from above, yet once more the human adapted, leading his squad through collapsed structures and narrow streets where the machines lost their advantage. He directed covering fire with calm precision, pointing where his allies should aim, and when close quarters fighting erupted, he became a whirlwind of steel, his blade cutting through armor and weapons with the same terrifying grace he had shown before. By the final hour, his squad had reached the central objective, a fortified tower held by the strongest rival team. The defenders believed their heavy weapons would hold, but the human saw openings no machine could predict. He split the squad into two groups using distraction and silence. Then he slipped through shadows, scaling walls and weaving past defenses until he was inside the heart of the stronghold. There his blade sang once more, striking with such speed that the defenders barely raised their rifles before falling one by one when his squad finally stormed the objective. They found the human already there. Blade lowered, eyes calm, victory claimed. The simulation ended with alarms signaling completion, and the commandant himself appeared to announce the results. Not only had the human squad completed the objective, but they had done so with the highest efficiency rating recorded in years. The arena erupted in murmurs of disbelief and awe. The cadets looked at the human not as a curiosity any longer, but as a leader. Someone who had proven that war was not won by the flash of plasma or the hum of energy fields, but by the mind, the will, and the hand that guided the blade. The commandant's voice carried across the hall as he declared to every cadet that this was the lesson they must carry with them: arrogance and over-reliance on technology had blinded them to the truth of war. The human cadet had reminded them that victory comes from discipline, adaptability, and spirit. Even in silence, he had taught more than any lecture could. The cadets bowed their heads, some in respect, some in fear, and some in deep contemplation as the weight of the revelation sank in. When the human walked from the arena, his blade sheathed and his steps unhurried, the crowd parted before him, not out of ridicule, but out of recognition, for they now understood that he was more than just a cadet. He was a reminder of what humanity could bring to the galaxy, and the lesson was far from finished. The final part of the Academy's long trial began with a tension that seemed to hang in the very air. Cadets from every wing gathered to witness the culmination of months of whispered rumors and tests. The human cadet had already faced every trial imaginable, and yet the eyes of instructors and students alike betrayed the same mixture of doubt and awe as he stepped into the center of the grand arena. The walls around them were lined with observation decks and holographic displays, showing past encounters, every move he had made recorded and analyzed for all to see. But today there would be no simulation. This was the ultimate test of combat and leadership. The commandant's voice echoed across the arena, declaring the rules. The final exercise would pit the human cadet against the Academy's top 10 warriors in a free-form duel. Each opponent was chosen for their skill, experience, and reputation in their respective combat fields. Energy blades, plasma rifles, and adaptive armor would all be in play. The crowd held its breath. The aliens from distant worlds whispered among themselves, wondering how one human could survive, let alone prevail against such overwhelming odds. But the cadet's expression remained calm, his eyes scanning the field, analyzing the positions of each adversary and the layout of the terrain. The signal sounded and chaos erupted. The 10 warriors spread quickly, adopting strategies they had used to defeat other cadets. The human remained still for a heartbeat, then moved with measured steps, weaving between debris and covering structures, allowed the others to focus on each other while he observed their movements like a predator studying prey. He had learned from every encounter, every simulation, and every skirmish, and now all that knowledge became instinct. His first move was subtle, a step to the left and a quick swipe with his blade, cutting a support beam that sent sparks flying and caused one opponent to stumble. One by one, he engaged the warriors, not with brute force but with precision and strategy. He used feints and misdirection, creating openings in their formation, exploiting overconfidence and hesitation. His blade moved with uncanny speed, striking armor joints and weapon circuits, disrupting the flow of combat. Every time a warrior thought they had an advantage, it vanished. As the human adapted faster than any sensor could track, he used terrain as an extension of himself, ducking behind crumbling walls, rolling across shattered floors, and leaping over obstacles with a grace that seemed impossible for someone without enhanced augmentations. The onlookers were unable to look away. Despite their combined efforts, the human began to dismantle their coordinated attacks, his squad training now a memory, his instincts a weapon more lethal than any energy cannon or mechanical exoskeleton. One by one, the Academy's elite fell, not in reckless defeat, but carefully neutralized in ways that ensured they could continue training afterward. The human treated each opponent with a mix of mercy and efficiency, leaving them stunned and questioning how a single cadet could manage what 10 had failed to achieve. The crowd's murmurs grew into cheers and shouts of disbelief. Instructors whispered calculations and estimates that quickly became irrelevant, because what they were witnessing was beyond prediction, beyond conventional understanding. The human cadet was a storm in motion. The sound of his blade slicing through reinforced armor rang like music to those who appreciated skill, yet like a nightmare to those who had underestimated him. He moved calmly through the chaos with unwavering focus, his eyes never leaving the next target. Each step measured, every movement decisive. As the duel neared its climax, Only 2 warriors remained the strongest of the academies, veterans. They circled him with wary respect and a hint of fear, realizing that raw strength alone would not suffice. His mind raced faster than theirs, analyzing every twitch, every micro-expression and shift of weight. He baited them into attacking each other while he remained an unpredictable variable. One false move and his opponents would be undone. He feigned a retreat, drawing them into a narrow corridor, and when they lunged, he spun into their blind spots, his blade flashing once, twice, 3 times, and in a heartbeat. Both adversaries were disarmed and kneeling. The arena fell silent. The commandant himself stepped forward, nodding in approval and recognition of what had been achieved. This was more than victory. It was a demonstration of humanity's potential, a reminder that intelligence and adaptability could surpass technology and raw power. The cadet stood tall, his chest rising and falling calmly as though he had just completed a routine drill. Yet every eye in the academy saw what he had truly done. In that moment, the human cadet was no longer just a student. He became a symbol, a lesson etched into the history of the academy, a reminder that underestimating anyone based on appearances or tools was a mistake that could never be repeated. His blade glinted under the lights as he sheathed it slowly and deliberately. The crowd erupted into applause, shouts of admiration and awe resonating through the arena. The cadets who had once mocked him now looked to him as a leader, a force that challenged their understanding of warfare and skill. As he left the arena, the whispers of disbelief became stories told across corridors and lecture halls. The legend of the human cadet, who had sliced through armor like paper, would inspire generations of warriors to come, and the academy would never forget the day when a single human showed them that spirit, intellect, and precision could change the course of battle. The sun had barely begun to rise over the academy grounds, casting long shadows across the training fields, when the human cadet emerged from the arena, his movements measured, yet effortless. The air was thick with anticipation, and the whispers of cadets who had watched the trials unfold. Every eye followed him from the distant observation decks to the ground level where instructors gathered their notes, but none dared to interrupt. For this was a moment that transcended ordinary training. The human had not only survived every challenge, he had turned every test into a display of mastery that defied expectation and imagination. He walked through the corridors, past the classrooms filled with cadets from countless worlds, each species observing with a mixture of awe, fear, and curiosity. Some muttered about how their ancestors would have never imagined facing a human who moved with such precision and calm. His presence seemed to bend the very perception of possibility around him, every footstep echoing with a silent promise that humans were not to be underestimated even in a galaxy filled with warriors who wielded powers beyond comprehension. The final ceremony was held in the Grand Hall, a structure built to inspire and intimidate at the same time. Its ceilings stretched toward the stars through massive transparent panels, and banners of victory hung from every wall. The human cadet stood at the center as the commandant approached, his voice resonating through the hall, announcing the results of the 7-part trial, a test that had pushed every participant to the brink, and yet only one had emerged not merely victorious, but legendary. The cadets' peers could not contain their excitement, and even the instructors felt a shiver of admiration, knowing they had witnessed something unprecedented. The human stepped forward, accepting the ceremonial emblem of excellence, a symbol traditionally reserved for the most skilled and disciplined of the academy's graduates. Yet this emblem now seemed to carry a new meaning. It was a testament to adaptability, intelligence, and the indomitable spirit of humanity. The cadets' eyes met those of every cadet in the room, and a silent understanding passed between them that what they had seen was the dawn of a new chapter in the history of their galaxy, a force that could not be measured merely by technology or brute strength. Stories of his trials spread quickly through the Academy network's messages and holofeeds, capturing every maneuver, every feint, every impossible escape and strike. The human cadet became a living lesson for all cadets who would follow, a symbol that skill, courage, and creativity could topple assumptions and defy probability. His name would be repeated in classrooms and training simulations for decades to come, inspiring others to push beyond the limits imposed by their own fears and expectations. As he left the hall, the cadets around him began to form a path, not in mockery or fear, but in respect. Many offered gestures of honor, and some even attempted to challenge him, knowing that to test oneself against a human of such skill was the ultimate measure of their own growth. Yet none could match his calm focus and the natural confidence that radiated from him like a quiet storm that could erupt at any moment. The whispers turned into conversations, the disbelief turned into respect, and the legend solidified with every retelling. The human cadet stood atop the observation deck overlooking the grounds below, the wind brushing past him carrying the sounds of training drills and distant cheers. He felt neither pride nor arrogance, only a serene certainty that the path ahead would demand more challenges, more trials, and more encounters that would test the very essence of humanity's ingenuity and strength. And yet he knew he was ready to show the galaxy that humans were not just survivors. They were masters of adaptation and strategy, a species that could turn the simplest blade into a weapon of legend and the smallest decision into a turning point of fate. The galaxy would remember the day when a human cadet faced the impossible and triumphed, when armor fell like paper before his blade, and when doubt was replaced by awe and fear. By admiration, he became more than a student, more than a warrior. He became the embodiment of humanity's relentless spirit, a symbol that no matter how advanced or mighty others seemed, humans could rise and leave a mark that could never be erased, and the Academy would never forget. The end.